This guy called Neatling came out with a stellar video about space politics and the new age of colonialism, I guess. Um, and it looks at basically all the space powers, in which I wouldn't really call it a race, because only one of the major powers, which is China, is actually uh, going there at a relatively fast pace, while the US is taking their sweet time. But anyway, the point is, this video talks about the politics of it all, and of course, China is included in that. And that's what we'll be talking about today, because this video got so many things wrong. It's more like correcting a lot of misinformation in this video. And the reason why I didn't record the what is China going to do next and what it is likely to do in the future is because I'm not in the condition to do it. I just had my second dose of Pfizer, and basically I've been feeling like they did say like after effect would be like cold-like symptoms and stuff. So I've been feeling a bit down and under, and decided to go like take it easy, go with the debunking basically, and yeah, so I'll skip to the relevant parts. Just a second. Okay.
Who will the major colonizers be? Obviously, the United States will be among the most prominent space colonizers, as it has a sizable population, an abundance of wealth and resources, and a massive sphere of influence that works closely with the United States, most notably the European Union and Japan. It is possible for Europe to go its own way in a more distant future, but a requirement for this would
Imagine if Japan just split with the US and just, united, just went with the rest of Asia. You know? Um, but yeah, we'll do those corrections and stuff.
be for it to become more federalized and centralized. A very likely outcome, in my opinion, is that we'll see coalitions of countries working together in the colonization of space, with the West and Japan making up one such coalition. Perhaps we'll see joint American, European, and Japanese colonies, as well as separate American, European, and Japanese colonies, all working together to some extent. The other obvious space colonizer is China. Although China's future is still uncertain, no one can deny.
So it's funny he says China's future is apparently uncertain, but not the US. Uh, Even if we assume the US empire would survive like 10 more years or something, which is a big if, um, I would be very surprised if that happens. So if the US empire does survive that long, then they can have Europe and Australia and whatever in a coalition. But they still won't be first because they're just that incompetent. Um, so it's not China that's has an uncertain future. It's the US with all the issues we've already covered in this channel. But yeah, he's basically, assuming he's American, he's basically projecting as usual.
That it is today a great power. It has a massive, although admittedly aging population and a very large economy, second only to the United States.
World's largest economy is China. Get that straight. Okay.
Much like with the United States, China does have potential partners it could work with. A few months ago, China and Russia did reveal that they will work together to set up an automated lunar research station. No specific plans have been revealed, but it's not supposed to be a manned project, unlike Artemis. But of course, this
So I would say this is personally, I would say like an automated moon base, assuming this news is true. I haven't heard about it. I would say that's much more likely than a human base. But eventually we'll have human bases and stuff like that up there. But we certainly have to have like robots and stuff building first, you know.
this could be an indication that they may work together later in the 30s if they want to compete with the United States and its allies in space.
Uh, so what I think in the 30s, that's a bit too far. I think it'll happen before, like much before. Um, Especially China. I think like it, they're gonna bring everyone basically, all the developing countries, and even some rich countries as well. So you got the UAE working with China, maybe Saudi Arabia as well, Brunei, Singapore. You never know. And I feel like once the U.S. empire does collapse, we would see like we'd see more countries willing to join China because their deals are just much better. Uh, Really, the current path the U.S. is going towards is it's really uncertain. It's unpredictable. Like, would the U.S. even survive as a nation? That really depends on if Americans wanted to survive as a nation. Otherwise, it would like divide, and it just doesn't have the power to compete with united China. You know, which has the world's largest economy now, um, the largest manufacturing capacity, obviously the largest population, and also increasing life expectancy. So his argument that like aging would be some kind of big weakness is like it's kind of irrelevant because I think it's gonna happen before like 2030, maybe the late 2020s, and 2030, like beyond that is when things would start to really kick off, so we can expect a lot of big stuff from China in that regard, and its capacity to fix its issues is way better than that of the US, but we all know that. So I did some a few months back, I did some calculations, right? And I would say China's economy right now in purchasing power parity terms would be around 30 trillion dollars, or a little bit more than that. And their manufacturing capacity, so it's like 40% of GDP or something. So based on GDP, PVP, it would be like above somewhere around 10 trillion, 10 to 11 trillion. So you need a country at that level to sustain a moon base, because a moon base is no joke. And the US just, it doesn't have that kind of manufacturing capacity, and it just doesn't have the political cohesiveness to maintain a facility of that kind. It's just not built for space colonization.
I also see several countries in Asia and much of Africa falling under the Chinese sphere of influence.
So looking at this map, right? So we got the states in Western Asia. So I mentioned UAE, Saudi Arabia, and maybe like the much smaller nations. They'll be sending satellites and stuff that they built through Chinese rockets. So Oman, maybe one day, hopefully Yemen. Once the situation. The next 10 years, that it doesn't seem likely. Same with Afghanistan, but hopefully things get better there. As I said before, like once the U.S. empire weakens, and the Chinese influence growing rapidly, a lot of countries are going to switch to China's side, and they'll build their own sorry, not rockets, but like satellites and stuff, and pay China to send it to space. So I can see a lot of Eastern European countries, Russia, obviously, maybe even Japan one day. You never know. South Korea as well. I can see it happening. Mongolia. A lot of Southeast Asian states. And maybe Australia. You never know. This is assuming the empire collapses. But even if the empire doesn't collapse, you'll still have a lot of Asian countries and African countries. Probably a lot of Latin American countries as well, going over to China's side, and some of Eastern Europe as well. Even though some of those states are incredibly right-wing states, so they're the opposite of China ideologically. But the money is what they want.
Influence in the coming decades, thanks to China having trapped them in debt. So perhaps
I literally explained before why it's got nothing to do with trapping them in debt. It's basically another U.S. projection, which they do through their institutes like IMF and the World Bank. But China's actually a pretty big forgiver of like debt and stuff like that. And it's already forgiven a lot of debts because of COVID and stuff. But yeah, this is just another US projection. The reason these countries are on China's side is simply because China provides better deals. But because this guy knows nothing about China, he has to project what the US does.
perhaps some of those developing countries will contribute to future Chinese space endeavors. I would also like to mention that Russia is still a bit of a wild card in geopolitics.
No, it isn't. It's like it's firmly on China's side. And I've even heard like apparently Russians don't even consider themselves Western anymore. They consider themselves like Asiatic group of people, so Eastern. So take that news as you will. I don't know if it's really true, but apparently that's the kind of sentiments that's becoming popular there. They no longer see themselves as Western. Even though if you ask an Asian person like me, we wouldn't really consider Russia Asian because they just saw their architecture, their culture. It's very similar to the rest of Europe. It just stands out.
Currently, the lean towards China is simply because they both have authoritarian governments and see the US as a rival.
Oh my god, this is like a meme at this point. It's been debunked so many times. The reason it has nothing to do with authoritarianism or any of that ideological nonsense. It's simply because China offers better deals. They're neighbor countries, so they're on friendly terms. They have to be. Uh, and Russia sees its future with China. Simple as that. And a lot of Asian countries are now starting to see that as well. So it's got nothing to do with the political systems. Politically, they're completely different nations. But if you have a very simplistic understanding of the world, then you come to conclusions like this, which is so simplistic. Um, for one, China is a political meritocracy. Leaders get elected based on their performance. Previously, it was GDP growth. Now it's more like sustainable development and stuff. Russia is basically like a US style democracy. They're not at all similar. And China does have elections at the village level, which makes sense because people at that level, they would know the people they elect personally, It's a small unit, that's why. But within the party, it's elections within the party, and that's how people who are capable rise to the top.
But I don't really know what'll happen in Russia politically once Putin is gone. Russia's future is not set in stone. The final country I see as a potential future colonizer is India. Whilst India is still far behind when it comes to wealth and development, this will not always be the case. And like Russia, India is a bit of a wild card geopolitically. It may grow closer to some Southeast Asian countries, and whichever Asian countries stand in opposition to China, it may become a close American partner, or perhaps a Japanese.
I mean, India is already pretty much a US puppet state, really. Until then, unless the empire collapses, it will continue to be so because it's a liberal democracy, um, just like Japan. So that puppet status will remain until the empire collapses. But we'll see.
Partner, as they're both regional powers who see China as a threat. But India will definitely be a few decades late to the race, as it has a lot of catching up to do at home. With the future colonizers covered, let's move on to more specifics about how borders may be drawn up and how competition between.
So I'm gonna skip. I'm gonna get to the China parts. I'm gonna skip the rest because it's all pretty boring. He just goes on and on.
Deposits. This could lead to them revising the Outer Space Treaty, dividing up the area in and around Shackleton Crater. As more and more bases are set up on the south pole of the moon, outright colonial territories may begin to form, akin to how Spain and Portugal divided up the world in the 1500s. But this is probably the most we'll get to see in our lifetimes when it comes to moon colonization. A few bright dots in the south pole of the moon, just barely visible in the night sky. Of course, with.
So he assumes things things will work exactly like they do on Earth, and that apparently China is the same, like behaves the same as these capitalist nations, for totally like profit motivated. But the thing with this take is that triggered India, Japan, the European Union, the US, and what's that at the top? Yeah, and he thinks there'll be like clear borders and stuff like this, as if humans live on the moon or something. Ugh. So what's most likely to happen is that you'll have a few bases here and there run by different countries. Some of them in a coalition, some of them by themselves. I can see China being in a coalition of mostly with other developing nations. Maybe a few rich nations as well. I can see like assuming the US like still survives in 10 years. I can see like US outposts being well just American, maybe in a coalition with Europe and maybe Japan, or they could be by themselves. But I know for a fact that China will certainly be in a coalition with its allies and stuff, but we'll see. As for India, I think India might choose to go by itself, or to go with the US.
Most we'll get to see in our lifetimes when it comes to moon colonization. A few bright dots in the south pole of the moon, just barely visible in the night sky. Of course, with time, not just the south pole, but the entire helium-3. When large enough settlements are a problem, the moon could be colonized. While the lack of water on the rest of the surface is a problem, it is home to large deposits of helium-3. When large enough settlements on the south pole of the moon are set up, with the moon's gravity being so low, point-to-point rocket travel shipping water from the poles to other parts of the moon could become possible and fairly cheap. It's also possible that asteroid mining begins to make sense economically, something which could definitely fund further colonization.
So with asteroid mining, I feel like China will definitely lead this, because there's this like a government-led initiative, while those of like the neoliberal countries are mostly run by private companies and stuff like that. So that will take ages to happen, because they only focus on what's profitable, and building space infrastructure is definitely not profitable. So it has to be led by government initiatives, and right now China is the only country that's doing things through government initiatives.
Of space. But this may well be half or an entire century in the future. How fast space travel technology progresses and how quickly it becomes more affordable is the main factor here, and it's not something I can realistically predict. So that's the moon, and what we may see in the coming century or so. But even India in the 50s or 60s, same a decade or so later, 2030s, we would likely see other world powers like China and Russia attempt the same a decade or so later in the 2040s, and maybe even India in the 50s or 60s, dividing up Martian territory much like on the moon. One aspect of colonization of space that is also interesting is how it may to some extent resemble colonization in the past, in the sense that companies will be
No, it won't. If he means like imperialism, like through, we'll see what it means.
doing a lot of the work. Regardless of what NASA and the US government does, SpaceX has plans for colonizing Mars, and I can definitely see a future in which SpaceX and potential competitors set up settlements in space independently from the US government. Combine this with mining on the moon and asteroids becoming profitable eventually, and you get some of the most powerful mega corporations in history, akin to the Dutch and British East India companies in the past. Perhaps we'll see completely corporate-run colonies on Mars and the Moon.
But all of these, like those companies on Earth that you showed, had like government backing to reach that kind of scale. It just doesn't like happen in a vacuum, especially in space, which is like extremely difficult to get to. Like, it's not profitable in the least. Whilst on Earth, it was profitable to do that kind of stuff.
not just for glory, but for profit. I'm sure there will be some government oversight, and if SpaceX sets up a major Mars colony, it certainly will be subservient to the US government. It's not
It won't be. It companies in the US even now are not subservient to the government, let alone a freaking space colony, like a company with that kind of power to run a space colony. This guy has no idea what he's talking about. And he's completely delusional about the US and other countries.
like companies function democratically, and it's not like you can unionize or go on strike when your employer literally provides you with oxygen. Workers moving to these colonies will probably also be beholden to work contracts that they can't really escape from, with them being on the moon or Mars and all. But of course, this would be nothing new in human history. At least this time, there is a lot more options once the settlement grows large enough, and perhaps some colonies may even experiment with direct democracy. Many European nations already make a lot of decisions by referendum.
Most likely, these supposed not like colonies, like the ones he's talking about, but any future space colonies would be data driven, probably not democratic in any way. Um, they'll probably be run by AI, and have a little like human input here and there. That's just speculation on my part, but I don't think you would be able to like vote policies or elect anyone on a space base.
So that wouldn't be unprecedented. I imagine Chinese run colonies would more than likely have assigned rulers and continue the authoritarian form of government that they have at home. And company run
Uh so still with the authoritarian crap. I mean, he was right about China having select leaders in these places. Pretty much all countries will actually. You gotta elect. You can't just elect anyone to that position. It's got to be someone who's well versed in that area, because it's a highly dangerous environment, and you need an expert to run things there. Personally, I think it'd be like some kind of management AI, um, which will have data input from humans and stuff. I don't think it'll be human leaders, to be honest. Because this is like talking 10 years in the future in his scenario. By that time, there'll be so much advancements in AI and stuff. So, um, and the amount of information data required to run these bases is humongous. So you need an AI to sort through that kind of stuff. It's not gonna it's not gonna run at all the way human settlements run.
colonies will probably not be very democratic either, although it really just depends on what good old Elon and Bezos have in mind. They could be run like regular, and trips are only days long, but I do think it's highly likely Martian colonies become fully independent when they're large enough. Trips between Earth and Mars take months. People in
Um, Independence really depends on like communication lag. Uh, I know with China's 6G technology, they can you can easily like communicate through space those like distances. 5G is also pretty good, but 6G. And China's advancing in that communication technology area. They would fix that communication lag, in my opinion. Um, and independence is dependent on like the home country being uh, like neglecting those bases and stuff. But if they're continuously funded by the home country, they would not want independence. The reason people want independence is to escape from exploitation. So I can see U.S. like bases and stuff trying to become independent. I doubt that'll be the case for Chinese bases because they'll be well funded and stuff.
Politicians on Earth would not really have any idea of problems facing the average Martian, and direct communication is not even possible. This is even more so the case in the outer solar system, which we may also colonize a century or more down the line. Our solar system may end up as hundreds or perhaps thousands of independent countries based on and around several celestial bodies, in asteroids, and perhaps even independent massive man-made space stations floating near resources where they can profit from mining. I really doubt we'll see a human space empire. It will instead be hundreds, if not thousands, of isolated and independent settlements that do communicate but could never truly be under one government. Of course, something like the UN may remain, but as long as we have no external threats, we'll probably always remain divided to some extent. As I see it, you could never feasibly unify more than a single celestial.
I mean, China's China, but it is pretty much like uniting the world at this point. But we'll see. Like, will their administrative capabilities be able to handle space colonies and stuff? I think they would be. The closer it is, the better. Just skip to here and
Which China has already experimented with. All in all, I think it will very much so be a Cold War scenario. The great powers will be well aware that direct war is out of the question, but there could be intense competition on getting to celestial bodies and their resources first. And part of this.
all right. So we'll end it there. Video is already more than 30 minutes, but regarding like the race to resources and stuff, China's already ahead of the game. But we know China will, sell it to other countries, no strings attached. And hopefully other countries can make good use of those kinds of resources. I don't think China will monopolize those resources. It would be the opposite if it was the US. They would monopolize the hell out of all the resources there. But yeah, that's all. I'll see you guys next time.